Good day, all of you. We thank you on behalf of Cocotown family. I am 𝗦𝗫𝗏𝗀 from Cocotown. We welcome you on behalf of Cocotown family for being present for this presentation. And AJ Wildey is going to take us through the Peru. This is like a virtual tour of different flavors of the cocoa and the trials and tribulations of the chocolate makers. So we bring these webinars for other chocolate makers to learn now, from the practical experience, and also with the pandemic all over the world, we are all hurting, but we need to get out from this, the negative news and focus on the positive and learn how people are surviving. So we want to take the positive news to the people around the world. So thank you. I see people from about 27 different countries have registered for this. We thank you all for giving your time to be here today. So before we go into the webinar, I just want to, give us brief introduction about who we are, why Cocotown is doing that. A lot of people are familiar, but we always see this time we saw many of the participants who registered. Uh, don't know, like they are not our customers. So just we want to give a brief 5 minute introduction. So thank you for giving me the time to share it. Cocotown, we have been in business since 1992. See, we started trading innovative specialty food processing machines and primarily focused on making South Indian food. And then we also realized over the years that these machines can be used for multiple, users. And then when the recession hit USA in 2007, we had to pivot. So we wanted to switch focus to an industry where we have the ability to make a positive social impact. So we found, with from our customer database, what all the things they were looking at, or using it for. Then we found there were few chocolate makers, handful of them. Actually there were five people who were making chocolate in small batches, but they did not have the right equipment. They had to be MacGyvers to change the machines what they had and then focus on that. So we wanted to change that. We wanted to bring a change in sustainability for three areas: environmental sustainability, business, and agricultural. So we wanted to enable the chocopreneurs with equipment and resources, so they can be the just the chocolate makers. They don't have to be an engineer too and worry about it, and just focus on the business to grow their business and become sustainable. Then we wanted to help cocoa farmers produce flavor beans they for the specialty industry or make chocolate at origin, so that the cocoa farming becomes sustainable. Because we found most of the farmers in different areas, they were more than 60 years old, and the second generation didn't want to get involved because they didn't see the future or the money. Because we also need money, but we also need food. So if the farmer doesn't put his foot in the mud, we don't have the food on our table. So we wanted to make sure farming is sustainable. And then we wanted to, also facilitate the evolution of cocoa as a superfood. Because before that, chocolate was considered as a junk food. Because if you take a chocolate bar, the commercial chocolate bar normally available, it's about 80% sugar. And women love chocolate, but they could not eat because of the calories. So we wanted to bring the positive side of the cocoa as a healthy food. And then we wanted to also help the chocolate makers provide a healthy food instead of the junk food. And then this is the just a small timeline of our company. So we started in 94, time 92 we started the company, but first we were distributing a couple of machines, and then 94 we introduced the wet grinders. In 2007 we introduced the commercial grinders for the chocolate, and then 2010 we roaster, and people started using our machines. They liked the quality and the performance and how it's helping their business. So over the years we have now full fleet of machines in different scales. And then we also have the patents on our machines. In 2020, again, we had to pivot. So originally, we were just giving the education in Cocotown office in Atlanta or India, so people could come and go through a boot camp, 3-day boot camp to learn how to make chocolate, business plan, everything we were teaching them. And then in 2020, people could not travel. So we said we will bring the education to their home. So wherever they are, they can learn and they can make their trade better. So that's why we started this Empowering Chocopreneurs webinar series. And today, this webinar is part of that. And then, so we are just hoping the future will return to normal life. Now they call the new normal. So at least where we can meet and greet friends in person, not just through Zoom alone. Even though we can reach more people now through the Zoom and at one time, we also would like to see the face to face and visit the farms, you know, uh, taste the cocoa in the origin country and taste the chocolates. We are looking for it. So I just want to finish it with Loka Samasta Sukhino Bhavantu. May all beings everywhere in the universe be happy and free, and may the thoughts and actions and words of my own life contribute in some way to the happiness and freedom for all over the, all the people in the whole universe. Thank you. Now, I will hand over the mic to Teresa. She will just give some housekeeping rules and also she will take over from here.
Thank you, Mrs. Balu. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. We're so glad you're here and really glad to have AJ with us. Just a little bit of housekeeping. If you'll put your questions in the chat as they come to mind, and at the end of the presentation, we'll have time to ask AJ the questions. Also, we're spotlighting 3 special chocolate makers, and we'll get to talk to them as well. So if you'll put your questions in the chat, that way, after the webinar, we can get a written transcript of that information and it'll live on our website so people can take advantage in the future of that information. Let's see, so we will be recording the event. That way, in the future, you'll be able to, you'll get a link and you'll be able to watch the recording. So before we move into the presentation, I just wanted to ask AJ a question or two, just so that we can get to know her. We have on our website the Meet the Presenter, and you get to learn a little bit about her, but I just wanted to ask a couple of questions, maybe just one question before we get into the presentation. And I was thinking about what did I want to ask. Usually I ask questions like, how did you get involved in the chocolate business? But this morning I thought about our conversation that we had the other day about, I was sharing when I first fell in love with 𝗤𝗏𝗃 chocolate. And I had an experience this week that took me back to that moment. And I wonder, AJ, can you share with us a little bit about that moment when, I won't ask you to share what was the chocolate bar, or maybe you might want to, just so it doesn't seem like, playing favorites, but can you describe for us that moment when you fell in love with Peruvian chocolate? Take us back to that moment and maybe share with us something about that.
Yes, Teresa, thank you. My love story with Peruvian chocolate actually began with cacao. I've always loved eating chocolate in general, and didn't really know about craft chocolate when I started getting to know Peru and studying farming in Peru. When I did my undergrad research on a farm in the mountains in the south of Peru, and I loved the feeling of Peru. There's a certain energy that's very palpable, that's equal parts warmth, equal parts creativity. The inspiration that the Peruvians I've had the pleasure of working with and meeting is that there's no roof, the sky is the limit. And so I fell in love with Peru for that energy. And I knew I wanted to come and do my master's in Peru after studying abroad in college. And I took a 2-month period where, before I dug into the master's program, I had this space of time that I wanted to do something that was very impractical, that wouldn't have anything to do supposedly with the rest of my life, but was something that was interesting to me on a personal level. And that was cacao and chocolate. And since I had done research on an Andean farm, I said, well, why not spend 2 months on an Amazonian farm and learn about where chocolate comes from? And I went into that period with the opinion that it was just going to be, for a 2-month period, then I was going to get back to Andean farming and my thesis and my master's, and it was all very regimented and laid out. But on day 2 of being on the farm and interacting with the cacao farmers, and going to meetings about programs of how to stimulate cacao production in that specific area, I was hooked. And that's how I got into trying and discovering craft chocolate. This was, for me, a very fortuitous chocolate destiny. My work on the cacao farm was in 2013. And as we'll talk about later, 2015 was a very important moment in Peru's craft chocolate history. And I was there. I was in it. I was there right before that important event. I was there during the event, after the event, and the feeling and the sensation, the momentum that event kicked off just carried you away. And so for me, I had the real true luck of being able to go to Peru's National Cacao Salon in July and just make rounds and try all of the chocolate makers who were there, who were trying things out, who were starting to grow. And I think more than trying one specific bar, it was going to each stand and being blown away at how different they were, yet they're all from Peru. And so that was how my obsession began. It's never really stopped. I still marvel at how amazing the chocolate tastes because of how different and unique they are. Regardless of whether it's my ideal flavor profile or not, it never ceases to amaze me, the creativity and the drive that our chocolate makers have here. And it's really a privilege for me to get to have a front row seat and watch how they grow and put on this amazing display of how diverse the cacao in Peru is.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, AJ, for that answer. Well, without further ado, I will turn the floor over to you and let you take us on this journey.
Yes, I've prepared a little presentation, but I also want this encounter to be conversational. So for everyone with us today, if there's any question you have at any point in the presentation, please feel free to leave it in the chat, and Teresa will be helping to moderate and get your questions to me so we can keep it as a conversation and we can touch on your question before we move on to a different topic. That being said, if you think about something we were talking about 5 minutes ago and you have a question that comes back to that, also feel free to leave it in the chat. And then the 3 chocolate makers that we'll be talking today have also left videos to tell you themselves about their experiences and about what their work with chocolate has been like for them. And we have the amazing opportunity to be able to ask them questions. So again, the chat is your tool, use it, and I hope that we can learn a lot together. So I'm going to share the screen now to share the presentation. One of the things that I wanted to highlight in this presentation were the idea of flavors of Peru, but also beyond the concrete flavors of the chocolate bar, also flavors in the sense of stories. Here in the picture we have, from left to right, we have Alex from Miroshnik Chocolates. He and Diana work together from their farm in 𝗬𝗃𝗃𝗃 to make 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃 chocolates. In the middle, we have Virgilio Garcia, who's part of the �pangoa co-op flavor development team. They work with over 600 associate farmers to bring out the best of Pangoa's cacao. And on the right, we have Carmen de Ciancas from Scrap and Chocolates, who has a really unique view on how to make each chocolate a very special gift with its own personality. So each of these makers, as is the case for all the makers we work with at Cacaotal, have really unique stories behind what the chocolate means for them. And that's also a kind of flavor that I want to talk about with you all today. So here's just a brief run through of what we'll be talking about. To kind of give you a framework for understanding the thread that we'll be following. First, we'll talk about what I was alluding to before, how Peruvian craft chocolate became the international reference that it is today, a little bit about my project, El Cacaotal, based in Lima, and then we'll get to hear from our chocolate makers. Unfortunately, Virgilio from Pangoa won't be able to join us today, but we do have his video, a really cool tour of the on-ground center of fermentation and drying practices, and a little tour of his factory. Then we'll talk a little bit about something that's incredibly unique as an origin country, and something that Peru in particular has been on the forefront of, and that's the idea of getting really specific and doing nanolots and really bringing out beyond one specific region the flavors of all the different microclimates and genetic diversity within that region. But with the good comes the bad, and to not end on a sour note, but also to really put in perspective the amount of problems and hurdles that chocolate makers in an origin country like Peru have to overcome. I want to touch a little bit on some of the challenges that are very real and very present, to put in perspective a little the level of their success and their triumph. And then, of course, an open Q&A if we have time at the end. Okay, so let's have a look at Peru. Peru is really unique in the sense that we have cacao growing pretty much throughout the entire country. Everything you see here in black are cacao producing regions. There's 14 regions in Peru that produce cacao. This is unique because as we know, cacao is very sensitive to the climate in which it grows. And not only do we have 3 major climactic regions in Peru, we can see in the north, we have Tumbes and Piura, which is coastal. Many of you are familiar with Piura. It's, as we'll talk about a little bit later, Peru's most emblematic origin, but it's very shocking to think about how cacao grows in what is a coastal desert-like region. We tend to imagine cacao thriving in the midst of a dense, dark tropical jungle. Yet in Piura, a lot of the cacao grows in semi-tropical forests. They needed a lot of irrigation systems to tend to cacao's intensive water needs. And so it's really incredible to think how cacao has not only grown, but thrived and become a reference for Peru in this coastal region. Then we cross the Andes Mountains and we hit the high jungle, which are, as the Andes dips down to the east, we start getting dense tropical jungle, but we have cold temperatures in the evening because of the high altitudes. So that's something that we see a lot on the edge of Cajamarca. We see it a lot in Junín and Pangoa, in Cusco, Ayacucho, where Miroshnik works. And that presents its own unique set of challenges. And then, of course, we have cacao growing in the lowland jungles where it's hot, sticky, a bowl of humidity, warm all the time, intense rains. And you can kind of get the idea of, spoiler alert, how different the cacao in Peru will taste. Here we have, just for your reference, where Piura is located. Piura, as I mentioned, became Peru's first cacao to really be linked to quality. That was in 2012 when everyone started talking about the famous white cacao. It was famous outside of Peru before it was famous in Peru. Even today, a lot of people who live in Piura aren't aware of the celebrity status that its cacao has outside in Europe, in North America, and Asia. So it's been a really interesting reverse coming into one's own and really embracing the identity of the cacao in Piura. And as we'll talk about later, no one has dedicated as much passion, investigation, and love to the cacao from Piura as Carmen from Scrap and Chocolates. Being from Piura herself, she's really delved into and made it one of her missions as a chocolate maker to show people that Piura cacao is not just one. There are many different varieties growing in many different climates in Piura, and each of them has its own personality and flavor. So that's something that we have the luxury of getting to enjoy here in Peru. No story about Peru's history with cacao would be complete without mentioning the alternative development programs that have been carried out since 2002 to the present. My own story with cacao began thanks to an alternative development program. I was here in 𝗬𝗏𝗃𝗃, this region department that looks kind of like a little dinosaur. Alternative development programs are aimed at transitioning farmers from the harvest of coca, which tends to be linked to the narco-trafficking trade, specifically in the central jungle, and move them towards a more illicit production of cacao. It's been going on for almost 20 years. It's an initiative not without its flaws, but in the general history, it's been a really important tool to incorporate many different farmers into the growing cacao industry. And here in Lima on the coast, not in a cacao producing region, is our little abode, El Cacaotal. We are currently at a really specifically exciting time in our history because we're opening a new shop. We've moved. And the new shop will be putting up pictures soon. Right now, there's no floor, but once we have everything installed and ready to receive visitors, we're putting up pictures. And this new space will really help us fulfill the mission that we have, which beyond being a store, we bring together craft chocolate makers from all over Peru. At our peak, we've been working with over 30 different brands. And we're also trained tasters. And so one of the ways that we look to collaborate with the makers we work with is performing sensory analyses and sharing our feedback with them, both on how the cacao tastes and also how their packaging is performing. What do people think about when they see their brand? As an anthropologist, I have that kind of insider's view. I watch as customers interact with each of the brands, and I pass that information along to our chocolate makers so they can tune any areas of their presentation to make them more attractive to the customers. And what we've been doing in the last 2 years have been a series of tastings and pairings activities. We've been able to travel to Chile, to the States, and get together a really interesting group of people and try pairings with coffee, specialty coffee, and also craft beer. So it's been a really unique experience to show how our chocolate, which is mind-blowing in and of itself, the flavors that these chocolates have are really unique, and also how new flavors can be created by combining the chocolate with other foods, other drinks. So that's been a really cool experience to show the kind of breadth of the sensory experience of Peruvian chocolate. So here's a little look inside of our flavor lab. This is one of the areas that will be getting the most drastic makeover in our new project. So I'm very eager to share that with you when it's finally ready. We receive samples. Sometimes we receive samples in beans, and we conduct all the stages through the roasting, through the conching and refining. Sometimes we get nibs and we are just asked to evaluate how the nibs taste. And sometimes we try the chocolate with our farmers and our chocolate makers. With Miroshnik in particular, Diana and I studied to be tasters together. We're both cacao and chocolate tasters, certified by the university, the Agrarian University in La Molina here in Peru. And so it's always fun when Diana's in town to get together and try not only their chocolates, but other chocolates from different parts of the world, even to keep our sensory analysis tools up to date. here on the right side of the screen, something that I find is very unique in Peru. For the past 6 or 7 years, there's been a sincere effort to go around Peru and in those 14 cacao producing regions that we saw a few slides ago, really hone down what kind of flavors predominate in the different cacao producing regions. This version is the latest version, conducted primarily by 𝗷𝗫𝗄𝗃𝗃, who is another cacao and chocolate taster in Peru. And while we have these hanging up in our shop and we use it as a tool, recognizing that they're imperfect in the sense that you can't say that all the cacao, for instance, from Junín tastes the same, just like what Carmen and Diane and Alex are doing from cacao with Piura and 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗃. They're showing that the one region can give you a huge range of flavors depending on the specific genetic variety, depending on the microclimate in which the cacao grows. So we go into this knowing that these wheels are references. They are not the be all and end all. There are some flavors that appear in the wheels that one doesn't perceive when they taste a chocolate. And sometimes there are flavors that one perceives in the chocolate that do not appear on the wheel. But I think it's unique as an origin country. I haven't seen this kind of work in any other country to really start expressing and illustrating in a more accessible way just how the flavors can change, what it means to have 14 cacao producing regions and the diversity that can allow in the chocolate. So I mentioned before that Peru had a moment in 2015. This was what I refer to as the Peruvian chocolate boom. What kind of catalyzed this boom was the first ever gold medal victory in the International Chocolate Awards. In 2015, a Cocoa Town customer was the first Peruvian chocolate brand to win a gold medal. And this really put Peru on the map as not only a cacao producing region, which if we remember in 2012, Peru had reached famous heights for its cacao from Piura, but now Peru was also getting recognition as a chocolate making country. And coincidentally, the cacao used in this gold medal bar was cacao from Piura. So this victory really cemented a lot of things in the mind of Peruvians themselves. They were seeing not only the possibility of exporting this amazing quality cacao, but also moving into the country the art and specialty of really crafting a good quality chocolate. Over the years, this tendency to make chocolate and the idea that Peru can also produce amazing quality chocolate that can rival other, without naming names, other countries with long histories and reputations of producing good quality chocolate, really excited a lot of our chocolate makers, and we saw an explosion of brands. And something that I also got to observe as this boom progressed was now people and new and aspiring chocolate makers, in addition to paying attention to Piura, Peru's claim to fame, they also started exploring lesser known origins. They started looking at cacao, for instance, from Amazonas, which has become a very important origin as of late in Peru, and also Chuncho from Cusco. So these beans and these origins, as famous as they are today, really started to come into the general public awareness after this big victory. The Amazonas cacao had a brief moment of fame in 2014 with a silver medal victory, but it never stuck until a few years later. And now people recognize not only Piura as being a hallmark of Peruvian cacao, but also the cacao from Cusco and Chuncho. So they've become household staples. And we've also, in addition to exploring different cacao origins, we've also seen an explosion in the diversity of the chocolate makers themselves. Not only are factories cropping up in Lima, we have very artisanal, home-based chocolate projects, like in the case of Carmen, that we'll get to hear about later. And we also have 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗄𝗃 initiatives cropping up, and we'll get to talk about that when we enter and see the story of the Miroshniks working in the south of Peru with cacao from their own farm. So I mentioned that some of the origins that started becoming famous are Amazonas, located specifically in the north of Peru, not to be confused by the entire Amazon jungle, which accounts for 60% of Peru. Amazonas is a very specific department in Peru, in the north of Peru, bordering Ecuador. And I have here on the screen a copy or a few screenshots of a book that was put out to study the diversity of cacao in Amazonas. This book is really interesting because it's 120 pages, and each page looks like what we have here with the collection, the name of the collection, the region of the farm, where the farm is located, the farmer on the right-hand side, and a series of 3 images: the whole cacao pod, what the seeds look like in the raw pulp version, and what the seeds look like cut open. And here we can appreciate an incredible diversity inside the cacao. You know, the book is fascinating to flip through because you see small, round yellow pods, you see big, long red pods, you see cylindrical, oval, purple pods. It's just, it's a rainbow of cacao pod colors. But when you look closer, you also see a large diversity in the beans. And again, Amazonas is one of the regions in Peru where they have discovered the highest level of cacao diversity. So it's not too surprising to see that diversity reflected in different seeds from one cacao pod. And this has been really a ripe area for further investigation. And of course, Cusco, located in the south of Peru, synonymous with the name of the native cacao that's famous in that region, the Chuncho. The Chuncho cacao can also be found, fun fact, in the neighboring departments of Madre de Dios and Ayacucho, as we'll see in the case with Miroshnik. But Cusco has become perhaps synonymous with this cacao. It's become its most famous origin. But woe to ye who think that there's one kind of Chuncho. This book in particular details 11 genetic kinds of Cusco, of Chuncho. We can see a small snippet of their investigation here, where they've collected different cacao pods that all qualify as Chuncho, but they are in fact different on a DNA level, different on a sensorial level, and of course, aesthetically, we can appreciate their differences as well. So books like these are important to, again, building the knowledge base of the cacao in Peru and really approaching flavor analysis and our comprehension of the history of cacao in Peru in a scientific, methodical, and academic way, which is just as important as eating chocolate. So the two together really complement each other and enrich the base that we have for understanding what's special about Peruvian cacao. Okay. So this is one of my favorite topics, 𝗙𝗵𝗃 and chocolate. This here is a picture of Alex's mother, Elena, Miroshnik, and they have their cacao farm in Ayacucho. And the 𝗙𝗵𝗃 trend means that the chocolate you're holding has been produced from the moment the cacao started growing on the tree. The person who produced your chocolate has also pruned the tree, maybe in some cases even planted the tree. In the case of the Miroshniks, they have cacao growing wild that they found when they bought the land in 2013. And so they never planted the trees, they just stumbled upon it. And the farmers behind these chocolate bars have put in the work of taking care of the trees, of harvesting the cacao at its peak point of ripeness, of cracking it open, fermenting, drying the cacao, going through all of the steps to ensure that what reaches your hands and your mouth and your belly is of the best quality. And so 𝗙𝗵𝗃 really gives a unique quality control component because it's the chocolate maker themselves are controlling exactly how the cacao will taste. They can do separate fermentation profiles. They can do specific drying practices. And it really gives you a next level of competitivity, not only in controlling how you roast the cacao and how long you put it in your refiner, but also how the bean tastes before you start transforming it into chocolate. Here, let's talk a little bit about the family behind Miroshnik chocolates. The chocolate brand itself, Miroshnik Chocolates, started in 2017. They work with different varieties of cacao that grow on their farm. Here's the family. We have this amazing group of people. We have a doctor, we have farmers. The only person missing from this picture is Diana, that you can see here. And the four of them together are in charge of creating really unique chocolate bars, single variety in their chocolate bars, which gives you the opportunity to sit down in your house, in your living room, wherever you are, open up a bar and taste their farm. It's a sensory tour of the different cacaos that grow on their farm. Here's a little bit of summary. I actually now want to share the video that they have, the Miroshnik family has prepared for us. So if you bear with me, I want to find their video here. This is Carmen. Sorry, bear with me. Okay. Here we are. This was prepared for us by Diana and Alex. It's in Spanish. The chart the slide we saw earlier takes a bit of what they were saying to us and translates it into English, but also feel free to ask any questions in the chat. After we watch the videos from the three farmers, the chocolate makers and farmers will be here to answer your questions in person, except in the case of 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗀, as I mentioned earlier. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy this little tour of the Miroshnik facilities. We're starting here on their farm in Matucana, Ayacucho, and we'll take a little jump later, a 4-hour drive to Huamanga, Ayacucho, where Diana will tell us about where the chocolate is made. So here we go.
Hola, soy 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗀 Miroshnik, cofundador de Chocolates Miroshnik, y hoy día nos encontramos en la finca Gamarra, ubicada en el centro poblado de San Juan de Matucana. Me acompaña mi padre, Oscar Gamarra Morales, médico de profesión y propietario de la finca.
Hola, es un gusto de saludarlos. Espero que con este video puedan conocernos un poco más y reciban saludos desde el Brain.
En esta oportunidad les explicaremos un poco de cómo surge la empresa y todo el trabajo que venimos realizando.
Hace 8 años comenzamos con el cultivo de cacao y es en el 2017 que formamos la empresa Más Cacao, con la finalidad de darle valor agregado a este fruto, mostrar su potencial y contribuir con el crecimiento de la región de Ayacucho. Junto a esta idea es que nace también Chocolates Miroshnik. Actualmente trabajamos con las variedades de cacao 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗀, nativo y Chuncho, de los cuales los 2 primeros los cultivamos aquí en la finca y el último lo compramos en 𝗣𝗶𝗶 a agricultores de la región de Chuncho.
En este momento estamos en época de cosecha y lo que hacemos es recoger los frutos y hacer este tipo de montones por diferentes partes del terreno para evitar un poco hacer el sobreesfuerzo. Entonces mi papá ahora va a proceder a hacer el quiebre de la mazorca y el despulpe. Para nosotros es importante llenar alrededor de 8 de estos baldes para poder completar una caja de fermentación.
Luego de realizar la cosecha y despulpe, llevamos los granos de cacao a fermentar en cajas de madera, proceso importante para desarrollar los perfiles sensoriales del grano. Luego secamos el cacao en mallas y lo etiquetamos por microlotes. Usamos el concepto Tree to Bar debido a que nos encargamos de cada etapa de producción de chocolate, desde el trabajo que se realiza en el campo hasta el producto final, en donde Diana podrá explicarles un poco más sobre los chocolates.
Hola, mi nombre es Diana Guamal Lumbreras, soy la cofundadora de Chocolates Miroshnik y catadora de cacao y chocolate. En esta oportunidad les voy a comentar un poco sobre el proceso de producción de nuestros chocolates. En nuestro pequeño taller recepcionamos los granos de cacao para luego seleccionarlo, tostarlo, descascarillarlo y preparamos los nibs para refinarlos. El temperado lo realizamos de manera artesanal sobre una mesa de granito. Cada tableta es única y tiene su propia personalidad. Esto no solo se debe a la diferencia en los porcentajes de cacao, sino también a las diferentes variedades de cacao que posee cada una y también algunas variaciones en el proceso de producción. Además, los empaques hacen referencia a la cultura y arte ayacuchana, debido a que es importante para nosotros poder destacar el origen del cacao y fomentar su consumo. Con los chocolates hemos recibido hasta el momento 7 reconocimientos en los concursos organizados por el International Chocolate Awards, que son 4 a nivel nacional y 3 a nivel internacional. Finalmente, esto nos permite saber que estamos por buen camino.
Super. Okay, minimize this. Now, a little run through of what it is part of what they were saying. I understand the frustration of not getting to really hear or understand Alex and Diana. Here's a small run through, a little bit of information about their farm. As we talked earlier, they work with single variety chocolates, and they have 3 different cacaos they work with. Native cacao that was growing wild on their farm when they purchased it. 𝗲𝗏𝗃, which is a local clone that's been growing in popularity in the past 5 or 6 years, that also grows on their farm. And they have Chuncho cacao in their chocolates that is purchased from their neighbor a few towns away in 𝗙𝗵𝗶𝗴𝗶, fresh. And Alex and Diana are in charge of the fermentation protocols to turn that fresh cacao into fermented dried beans and later in chocolate. In terms of the division of responsibilities, Alex tends to tend to the farm side of things. He oversees the harvesting, the fermenting, the drying. Each cacao gets its own fermentation treatment in its own separate fermentation box. So they do micro batches to really ensure that the chocolate that we enjoy later has been tailored to the specific requirements of each cacao. Diana, on the other hand, is the queen of the chocolate lab. She makes the chocolate in Huamanga, which is the capital city of Ayacucho. And in 2020, they opened up a coffee shop, which gives Miroshnik its own storefront. And they also became the first specialty coffee shop in the region. Together, amidst all of their bars, to date, they have won 7 awards, both on the national awards system scales and also internationally. Here we have a picture of Alex helping with the breaking open of the pods on their farm, San Juan de Matucana. As we mentioned earlier, the farm was established in 2013. So they've had an interesting run of working out the mechanics of going from tree to bar. It's an extra set of complications for the tree to bar makers to not only think about the ideal roasting profiles and how long the chocolate bar should be in the melanger, but also to decide when to harvest, how long to ferment. So it's a really commendable undertaking, and for those of you who've been able to try the Miroshnik chocolates, it makes you appreciate the incredible flavor even more. Okay, so here's a little view of the different chocolate bars they offer. We mentioned, right, that they are single variety. We have on the left, their highest percentage made with the 𝗲𝗏𝗃 chocolate. Then the 2 in the middle that, as Diana says in the video, the packaging design on these 2 in particular evoke a certain style of art that is also, speaking of native cacaos, this art style is native to Ayacucho. They're very emblematic of the retablos, which is a popular art style that grew into cultural patrimony registered with Peru's Ministry of Culture in the 70s. So part of what Diane and Alex wanted to do with their chocolates is not only transport you via flavor, but also via the packaging to the unique culture of the place where the cacao is grown. And on the right-hand side for the packaging for their native cacao, of course, scenes from the jungle. Okay, now we're going to travel to Junín, to the south of Peru, where we'll hear from Virgilio Garcia, who is in charge of the flavor development in the co-op, the Agrarian Coffee, Pangoa, Cacao and Co-op. They've been around since 1977. So really for me, one of the co-ops that's been doing an incredible work on long-term scale to reach out to their farmers, encourage good fermentation practices, and get an extra added value back to their farmers by processing their cacao into their own chocolate. This is something that a lot of co-ops have begun to do, and with increasing quality, specifically in the last 5 years. And from what I've seen working with different co-ops, the co-op at Pangoa really is a model to follow. Let me share our screen so we can hear from Virgilio. Here we have a little tour of the harvesting, fermentation and drying facilities, and we'll end here in his processing lab. So here we go. Welcome.
Bueno, que todos tengan un buen día. Mi nombre es Virgilio y quiero guiarles un poco en todo el trabajo que hace la cooperativa agraria cafetalera Pangoa, que estamos ubicados en el departamento de Junín, provincia tipo, distrito de Pangoa. Estamos en la selva central de Perú, en el tema del cacao y el chocolate. Este es el centro de copio. Ahorita estamos en una tarima y vamos a entrar un poquito a ver lo que hace el proceso de fermentación. Acá tenemos la fermentación, la recepción del cacao en grano fresco, que como podrían apreciar es blanco, ¿no? Y el registro del socio, del productor. Y luego pasamos también a otro proceso ya donde el cacao está ya más fermentado, y mañana sale a lo que es el área de secado. Estas son las tarimas de secado de cacao, donde el cacao va a tener que permanecer unos 6 días de proceso de secado. Nos estamos acercando al área de industrias alimentarias, donde es el local de producción de chocolates Pangoa. Acá está nuestro local. Vamos a ingresar y ver el trabajo que están haciendo los chicos, mis compañeros de trabajo. Ahí está Abner y Alicia. Bueno, acá están los chicos, ahí está Alicia, Abner. Están haciendo un pedido especial de chocolates. ¿De cuántos gramos, Alicia?
De 250.
Es un pedido, ¿no?
Sí.
Un pedido especial de chocolates con leche de 250 gramos. Acá tenemos la máquina Cacaotal con que trabajamos los chocolates. Hemos adquirido el 2019. Es para producir chocolates de 70% cacao. Tenemos otro refinador de chocolates de Cacaotal también, de 35 kilos. Que está produciendo chocolate con leche de 55% cacao. Acá tenemos también nuestra máquina pequeña de microbatch, pedido especial para Amanda de Cacaotal, los chocolates de 70% de cacao de origen 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀.
Super. So here's a little bit of what Virgilio was saying to us in the video. Virgilio himself has been working with the co-op for over 15 years, and he's in charge of bringing out the best flavors of the cacao from the associates of the 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 co-op. The co-op is huge, over 650 members. And of these members, there are coffee farmers, there are members who produce honey. 165 of them work with specifically native cacao. 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 is a unique area for cacao growing because it's had very little intervention of programs that look to introduce perhaps cacaos from other countries, for instance, some of the Trinidadian cacaos or the CCN cacao from Ecuador. This specific part of Junín in the 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 area has had very little intervention. So that's enabled these farmers to even not on purpose, keep intact the rich and diverse native cacao population in this specific area. It's also worth noting that the products from the co-op have both organic and fair trade certification. And in addition to exporting their cacao beans to different companies in Europe and North America, they've also had a lot of success exporting their chocolates. So a little bit of how the co-op works. We saw in the first scenes the fermentation facilities. The 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 co-op collects all of the cacao from its specific associate partners. They coordinate, they have a truck that goes. And as I was speaking with Virgilio during the pandemic, trying to understand how those first few months impacted their production schedules. Here in Peru, unfortunately, the pandemic reached one of its peaks right during the cacao harvest time. So for a lot of chocolate makers and cacao farmers, it was very difficult to assure the quality of the cacao that was going to be in the final product, but also to even harvest the cacao because there were very few farm hands available to hire to help with the harvest because Peru was in total lockdown from March through the end of July. So Virgilio mentioned to me that the government gave co-ops like 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 and other farmers passes to be able to circulate in their vehicle. And instead of having the farmers come to the co-op, 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 has a fleet of transportation vans, and they would coordinate with each farmer, applying all of the appropriate social distancing measures to pick up the cacao. And they would then bring the cacao from the different farmers back to the fermentation facilities. And if you notice at the beginning of when we were looking at the boxes, Virgilio did a zoom or close up on a sheet of paper that was hanging on each of the boxes. They register, they trace the cacao in each box back to the farmers. And this is something that Virgilio has been doing to map the different flavors of cacao based on where it comes from. It's something that I've admired of how Virgilio works. Instead of just, lumping everything together, doing the fermentation and making chocolate, he on his own kind of initiative has been trying to map the different flavors from the 165 farmers working with native cacao throughout 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀. Virgilio himself is specialized in cacao and post-harvest practices and has carried out different certification courses in universities, both in Spain and in Hamburg in Germany. What in the world were they doing inside the chocolate factory with all of that banging and beating? 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗀 was preparing a special order of 250 grams, so a quarter of a kilo milk chocolate. And so the banging was helping to get the air bubbles out of the final product. Quick information about the chocolates they work with. They have a uniquely industrialized setup that's come to them over the course of several years. They are lucky to have 2 45-kilo cocoa towns to help them get the demands met for their chocolates, both for exporting and for local sales. And then I'm very lucky to be able to collaborate with Virgilio, where for El Cacaotal, he makes special batches with special roast profiles for different native cacaos. And those chocolates are what he was making in the small Cocoa Town machine, the 4.5 kilo that we saw at the end of the video. And the chocolate that is in the machine in the video just arrived here to El Cacaotal in Lima yesterday. So we're very excited to have been able to see the start and end of that production change. And this small mellanger is also key in the work that Virgilio does to register the different flavors of the native cacao found throughout the farms in Pangoa. Next up, hopping back to the north, Piura. We talked earlier about how Piura is more than just one cacao, right? It's more than the famous Piura Blanco that we've been hearing about, right? The great white cacao. One of the goals of Carmen from Scrap and Chocolates is to share with people the incredible diversity of Piura and the different white cacaos that it has. 2 of the batches she's been working on lately are from 𝗪𝗏𝗏 and 𝗪𝗏𝗏. And now we're going to hear from Carmen, the video that she sent for us to get to know kind of the behind the scenes work with her chocolate. So let me get her. There, Carmen, here you are. There we go.
Hola, soy Carmen, la creadora de Scrap y Chocolates. Voy a contar cómo comienza todo esto. Yo comencé con 5 kilos de cacao y hice un primer refinado en el molino de tamal. Me vi en la necesidad de comprar una melanger. Con una melanger sí podía hacer un chocolate porque en esa pequeña máquina de 2 kilos tú puedes llegar a moler, refinar, formular y finalmente obtener un chocolate. 2 cosas puntuales pasaron en mi vida. Uno, de pequeña mucho me gustaba jugar con las muñecas recortables. Es el papel, amo el papel, me encanta hacer todo con papel porque el papel es muy versátil, hay mucho color y recortar es una de mis pasiones. Con mi vida en mi infancia es el recuerdo de un bombón de licor. Era una cosa de locos querer entender cómo era que dentro de algo pequeño, cerrado, podía haber una caja, un licor y una pasa. Y no entendía por qué lado habían metido esas 2 cosas porque encima sonaban. Eso marcó mi vida. Literalmente me siento una niña cuando hago las 2 cosas. Cuando hago papel, cuando hago chocolates. Hacer estas 2 cosas para mí me da una sensación muy marcada, muy fuerte de autonomía. Porque me gusta crear, me gusta ser libre cuando hago estas 2 cosas. Me gusta transformar, trabajar con las manos.
Cuéntanos cuál es tu conexión con el cacao.
Creo que yo siempre estuve conectada con el cacao, pero no lo sabía. Hasta que un día en un periódico dominical me encuentro con una gran noticia que me impactó, porque ahí decía, los verdaderos chocolates a base de cacao. Entonces me hice la pregunta, la gran pregunta, si esos son los verdaderos chocolates, entonces ¿yo qué estaba haciendo todo este tiempo? Encontré que en el Perú, en diversas regiones del país, habían zonas cacaoteras. Y una de estas era Piura. Entonces, Piura es el lugar donde yo he nacido. Entonces, mi curiosidad creció muchísimo más. Salí muy pequeña de Piura, estoy hablando a la edad de 5 años. Mis recuerdos eran muy poco, entonces decidí viajar para encontrarme con esa reconexión. Y cuando yo llego a los campos cacaoteros de la 𝗫𝗄𝗃, es como que si pasara por una película todos mis recuerdos de pequeña. Era como sentirme que pertenecía a ese lugar. Y es esa sensación de identidad con mi antepasado, con mi tierra, la que me hace que yo me apasione más. La clave de nuestro crecimiento ha sido el constante aprendizaje. En el año 2017 ganamos nuestro primer premio con un chocolate de leche al 49% cacao de la 𝗫𝗄𝗃. Fue ahí cuando nos ganamos el premio de oro. Es el premio, el mejor, el más grande, el que me gané, porque era pues literalmente el premio al esfuerzo de todos estos años que vine trabajando desde que inicié la primera vez. Este premio fue el motivador para yo seguir creciendo y seguir dándole fuerza y dedicación a esta pasión que me motiva a seguir. Tanto así que al siguiente año decidí probar con otros orígenes, no solamente con Piura, Amazonas, Madre de Dios, 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃. En el siguiente año ganamos 8 premios. Al siguiente año ganamos 2.
¿Qué le dirías a la Carmen de hace 10 años atrás?
Que sea más atrevida de lo que es, que lo deje todo sin miedo, porque 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃 Chocolates considero que es un ejemplo de que no se necesita tener tanto ni grandes cosas, simplemente es la pasión, la entrega, la perseverancia, el deseo de crecer para que tú logres tus sueños. Así es como he ido avanzando. A base también de prueba y error, uno va aprendiendo, atreviéndose, como les digo, ¿no? Siempre no te quedes con las ganas o con el hubiera o si me sale o no me sale. Si te sale, bien. Y si no, lo vuelves a hacer, así de simple. Esta es mi historia. Y gracias por formar parte de ella. Abrazos de chocolate.
Really inspiring story from Carmen. So I wanted to share a little bit of some of the things she said. Very quotable, Carmen. Oopsies. Here we go. Here we are. So Carmen was talking about how she got into chocolate. Her daughter Adele was doing a mini interview at the end. She talks about how when she was younger, she ate a bonbon and she became completely enamored, mystified, marveling at how the filling, which in that time was a liqueur and raisin, got inside the bonbon. And she mentions that this was one of the moments that really propelled her to work with chocolate. She also loves working with paper, and that's part of the unique trademarks of Scrap and Chalk. As you can see in the picture here with Carmen, she hand wraps and stamps each bar with a unique design. She has a llama collection. For those of you who have been fortunate enough to either come here to Peru and grab a few bars, or you've received them in the mail in the States, it's really beautiful to see how each bar has its own personality. And she's got, I think, about 5 different llamas and alpacas that she stamps onto each bar to really accentuate its flair. As Carmen mentioned in the video, she began working with cacao from her native Piura, really inspired by an article that came out in a Sunday newspaper talking about chocolate made with real cacao, real chocolate. And she started wondering, well, I've been working with chocolate for so long. What have I been doing if I haven't been using this real cacao? And so when she started working 𝗙𝗏𝗃 chocolates, she started working with cacao just from Piura, where she was born. And then in the last 4 years, she started incorporating different origins. She works with cacao from the north of Peru, from the south, from the center, to really give this varied experience to the people who buy her chocolate. In total, they have accumulated 11 different award medals on Peru's national chocolate competition scale. And here, a small quote at the end of the interview. Adele asks Carmen what advice or what she would say to the Carmen from 10 years ago. And she says, be bolder than you feel, grow without fear, that one doesn't need big fancy things. There was a lot of pressure, Carmen told me in the time that I've known her, to standardize, that, you know, working with chocolate, hand wrapping, customizing, that was a waste of time. You could really streamline your production costs and timeline by getting one standard package and call it a day. But this went against everything that Carmen felt made her and 𝗙𝗏𝗃 chocolate special. And so perhaps she fretted about this 10 years ago, but today Carmen has come into her own, embracing this detailed aspect of 𝗙𝗏𝗃 chocolates that, in addition to the amazing quality of the chocolate, really makes the brand special in the eyes of consumers. And she would say to herself that it's passion, it's dedication, perseverance, and desire to grow that will let you achieve your dreams. So some really amazing chocolate inspiration from Carmen. Here's a close-up of some of her alpaca and llama stamp collections. Carmen also mentioned that one of the things she loves, in addition to chocolate, is paper. And this inspiration comes from when she was a girl and would work with paper dolls. And she's brought that fascination from her childhood into her day-to-day life. And that's part of what makes 𝗙𝗏𝗃 chocolates so special. She had this memorable quote about working with paper and chocolate, that they give her a strong, defined sense of autonomy. Because I like to create, I like to be free. When I work with these two things, I like to transform, working with my hands. Like I said, so quotable, Carmen. I just had to include that in this slide. Really, again, going against the mold and the tendency to scale, standardize, be more efficient, in air quotes, when you produce. For Carmen, the efficiency is making people happy. And Carmen always talks about chocolate being a gift, and the gifts are just as unique as the people receiving them. So before we switch to hearing from Carmen and Diana from Miroshnik, if you want to get your questions ready, we'll switch that in a second. I want to touch on these last two things, because perhaps it'll give you more of a context to understand how amazing the work that Carmen, Diana, and Alex is. The luxury that we have through them, of them working on such local levels. In the case of 𝗙𝗏𝗃 chocolates, we talked earlier about how Carmen explores the different genetics and microclimates of Piura to make nanolots. And she has a collection of chocolates in different percentages. You have a milk chocolate kit, you have a 70% dark chocolate kit, and 85% dark chocolate kit with different origins, right? So we have two different regions, for example, 𝗙𝗏𝗃𝗃 and la quemazón, the same percentage, both from Piura, but with different kinds of cacao and growing in different conditions. And you can perceive the differences in the flavors. So this is something that, coming full circle, as Piura is perhaps the most highly touted origin of Peru. When people think of cacao from Peru, they think of Piura almost immediately. Carmen is opening up their eyes to show that not only is there one kind of white cacao, you have the Piura Blanco, Cacao Blanco, Gran Blanco, that are located in different specific regions of Piura. In the case of Miroshnik, as we mentioned, because they are working with the cacao from the tree, they have the benefit of being able to create single plantation, single varietal bars. I have these two bars from them in the pictures here, are two of the bars that we'll be offering later as a kit for those of you who are participating in this webinar, to try two different cacaos that grow together on a farm. And this is specifically the green bar, a really important initiative, not only to show how different the cacaos are from each other despite growing the same farm, but also, as I mentioned earlier, when the Miroshnik family bought their land in 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃, they stumbled across native cacao that was just growing wild. It had always been there. And in 2017, they started making a bar just from that cacao. And so this was the first time in history that a chocolate maker was showing what native Ayacuchano cacao tasted like. So this bar is a real treat. It's full of flavors that we as an academic and tasting and chocolate loving community never knew existed in cacao from Ayacucho. So it's important work, not only for them in producing quality chocolate and making a name for Peruvian cacao, but also important work to complement the academic studies looking and mapping the diversity of cacao in Peru. Last slide, not to burst our bubbles, but these amazing feats have not been achieved without overcoming significant challenges. For instance, access to machinery. There are very few options in Peru if you want to purchase nationally made machines. It's starting to grow, and there are 2 or 3 large companies that are offering it, but we still haven't gotten to the technological point where we can compete with the final stage of the tempering process, for instance. So many of the chocolate makers, to get their amazing temper and their sheen and homogeneous color, either temper by hand, like Carmen and Diana, or they have to import an expensive machine, usually from Europe, which costs a lot and takes a long time to get here. And we also have the extra taxes on top of the cost of the machinery. Then we also have another barrier that every chocolate maker in Peru feels in their soul. Peru is just not a chocolate consuming country. The average Peruvian per year consumes, it increased a little bit from last year, consumes about 600 grams per person, right? If we compare that to the other extreme, say in Belgium or Switzerland, the average person consumes 8.8 kilos. The monthly consumption of a person in Belgium or Switzerland is more than the yearly consumption of a Peruvian. So the chocolate makers in Peru are up against a wall here, where the local market isn't as embracing of craft chocolate, and yet to ship to countries that do have high consumption rates and that do value and are aware of what craft chocolate is, you're up against expensive shipping costs. So they're kind of between a rock and a hard place in finding the happy medium between sales, but also not accruing heavy, high shipping costs that eat too much into their margin. We also have inefficient internal infrastructure. The regions where cacao grows in Peru are often regions where national plans are inefficient at providing road structures. They're regions that are prone to landslides, to flooding, and this makes it hard for the primary material to get to Lima, where a lot of the chocolate makers are based. It also makes it hard for chocolate makers who are making their cacao at origin, like Virgilio and 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃. We've had a long array of problems of getting the chocolate safely from the jungle where they are in 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃, Junín, to our shop here in Lima, because the bridge breaks and the chocolate gets stuck in the blazing Amazonian sun for an undetermined amount of time and melts. Or when they're shipping the chocolate and they load it into the bus, despite having warnings on the box, keep out of sun, keep away from heat, the box gets stuck next to the bus engine and the chocolates melt. So there are all of these factors that are out of the hands of the chocolate makers. They can't control infrastructure. That really makes you appreciate a beautiful, good tasting good looking chocolate bar when you have it in your hands here in Lima. Speaking about factors that are out of their control, in the past 3 or 4 years, in terms of the harvesting schedules, we've seen a huge instability in Peru, particularly. This year, the harvest has been extremely late, and this makes it difficult for farmers to plan a month or two in advance of, well, when will they be able to produce certain chocolate bars? When will they have to hire different farm hands to help with the harvest? It's unpredictable and worrisome when it isn't raining, when it should be raining, and vice versa. And then in a more macro sense, origin countries generally tend to have weak labor laws. A lot of the farmers are unprotected in terms of earning a decent living wage. The daily rates for the work on a farm are incredibly low. Sometimes they're only around $8 for a whole day of hard labor out in the sun. And this makes it, of course, unattractive to younger generations. And at our last point, farmers are seen as poor, unskilled. It's an undesirable occupation, not even worthy of being called an occupation, when the reality is that farming and the work that these people do to provide us with the primary material to eat is among the most important work that we could have. And so that's why, especially with the 𝗙𝗵𝗃𝗃 movement and the work that Carmen is doing to spotlight the specific regional profiles of the cacao in Piura, that's important work that shows that farming and the work that these cacao farmers are doing is a profession. In Virgilio's case, he's gone to different universities in Spain and Germany to specialize. And the craft chocolate movement, if nothing else, is contributing to this revaluation of what the farmers are doing on the ground level. And I think that, combined with the amazing flavored chocolate that one can enjoy, are the only 2 reasons necessary to jump on and appreciate the craft chocolate movement. Now I would like to stop sharing my screen and invite Teresa to turn the mics over to our amazing chocolate makers and farmers. We have Carmen here with her daughter Ingrid that will help translate your questions if any of them are in English. And also Diana joining us from Ayacucho. So any questions that you have for them, please, now is the time. They will both have microphones to be able to answer you in person. And if there's any translation needed for the response, I'll be here. In the meantime, surrounded by these amazing cacaos that the farmers have so graciously sent to me, just if you can appreciate the size differences. This one was sent to me by Virgilio from Pangoa, in addition to this collection, so you can see the amazing color differences. And this one, Diane and Alex sent to me from their farm in Ayacucho, a Chuncho, of course, and this is a native cacao that grows in Pangoa. Just mind-boggling how different they are. I also love the textures. You can see it's like a lizard skin texture on this one. The Chuncho is very smooth. And Carmen has got us cacao pods from Platanal Bajo, one of her nano lot origins. And I loved the color difference, but also the unique formation at the end, the pointy end. Just a beautiful collection of cacaos. So if you have any questions, and Teresa, if we turn the mic over to Carmen and Diana, we'd love to hear your questions.